Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Anton with Definity Partners, and I'm here today with Dave Hatter, our solutions architect.
Hey, Robin.
Hey, Dave. We're here today to talk about why software development projects stall or fail. And Dave is our resident expert, so he's going to kind of tell you a little bit about what you guys can do to hopefully avoid some pitfalls.
Well, chances are, if you've ever tried to build any kind of custom software development project, process automation project, you run into problems where projects get off track. They don't stick to the triple constraints of time, cost, or quality. And it's fairly common, unfortunately. Standish Group has done literally decades of research on this subject. And while it's gotten somewhat better, it really hasn't gotten that much better. During their last study period, they found that about 18% of all software development projects fail outright and around 43% struggle. So you're looking at roughly 50% of all projects that have problems or outright fail, which really isn't very good. I mean, if you had a track record like that in like civil engineering projects, I mean, you'd have to have a lunar rover to even get around on the street. So it doesn't really bode well for the industry, unfortunately, but there are some things you can do to make that better.
So, why do they fail, and what can you do to make them better?
Well, from what I've seen, they mostly fail for a variety of reasons. Priority wise, I would say first and foremost, lack of adequate or accurate requirements. I mean, people go into this process when they're trying to build custom software and they don't realize how complex their business processes can be. They don't try to simplify and standardize those processes. Sometimes they try to build software that attempts to automate a bad process, or even if they do try to make the process better, they don't do an adequate job of capturing the complexities of the process, of understanding what are the real needs of the business. Do you really need to build in every single thing? So they don't really do a good job on the front end of capturing those requirements in a way that actually makes sense for the business. They end up building something that isn't really what the business needs in the first place. That's a key driver: inadequate or inaccurate requirements. Another big problem is, even if you have the requirements right, then not following a good project management process where you're actually following best practices and making sure that the project is staying on track, which includes really some kind of fast feedback loop where there's continuous ongoing interaction with the stakeholders. Usually, if developers just go off and start doing a bunch of programming, even with good requirements, if no one is constantly evaluating, are we on track, are we off track? And even if the requirement says X, and sometimes until the users see it, if that doesn't happen for a long period of time, you're going to end up way off track, because they're going to say, I know I said X, but what I really wanted was Y. And if it takes you a long time to get to that Y, you're going to have a gigantic gap in there where potentially a lot of rework needs to be done, which is not good for anyone.
I know you said, to monitor it and pay attention. How often do stakeholders need to be paying attention? Is it a weekly, a daily, monthly?
Well, I think it depends on the project itself and the complexity of the project. But generally speaking, in my opinion, and from my experience from doing this for a long time, more is always better. More interaction with the stakeholders, more stakeholders with their hands on the product, more of an agile Scrum type environment where there's small bits of development. You're trying to do small chunks and saying, is this right? And then continue to build on those chunks. The bigger the project gets, the larger the scope, the more complex it is, the less likelihood that you're ever going to get a project that's successful, because it's difficult to get there. It's better to work in small, you'll hear the term sprints and small chunks to make sure that you're staying on track and you're constantly delivering business value to the stakeholders, and that they can see that value and say, yes, that is what I need, and now move on to the next function.
Does Definity have certain standards? Like, what do we do when we work on a project with a client? Obviously, we have to help set these standards and requirements up front. So do we have things that we follow, processes that we follow that might be different than others, so that we make sure our processes or our projects are successful?
Yeah, good question. We kind of have over time tried to follow kind of our own unique blended potion, if you will, of various different best practices. Some of it's based on Project Management Institute, PMP type best practices for project management. Some of it's based on DevOps. Some of it's based on the Agile. It depends to a certain extent on each project, but we do have some basic standards. And I think the one thing that we do really well, maybe better than our peers in some instances, is we really try to focus on what are the business outcomes you expect? Why are you willing to spend money on a software development project? What processes are you trying to automate? Can we improve those processes? And really work closely and collaboratively with the stakeholders, with business experts who understand business, to capture what is it we're trying to do. Get alignment with the stakeholders and with the development team, and then following these best practices, go through a series of fast feedback loops and ongoing iterative work to make sure that ultimately the project is successful at the end and it does what the business paid for. Because most people don't just want to pay for a bunch of programming. They're willing to spend money on building a solution for their business because they have business challenges and they want a solution. They don't just want a bunch of programming, unfortunately.
Right. So we look at it as more of a holistic view from the business aspect more than just solving a problem for them.
Absolutely. We're a lot less concerned about specific technologies and should it be .NET or Java or whatever, and a lot more concerned about why are you willing to spend money on this and what are the specific outcomes you're trying to achieve through this solution, and how can we help you build a path that gets you there in the most cost-effective and most efficient manner and really solves the problem and builds a solution that works, so that even if the project meets the requirements were correct and it actually solves the problem. Many projects ultimately, quote, fail, even though the, quote, requirements were met. It doesn't really solve the business's problem, and that's due to misalignment, inaccurate requirements up front, as opposed to programmers who just couldn't do the work.
Great. Well, we know this is a really big topic, and we're taking this topic online with our blog. So if you want to check out Dave's blog online at definitypartners.com/blog, you can check that out and leave your comments. We also have a survey that you could take and give us some information about what's going on in your actual business. We'd love to hear from you, and we can continue this conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Dave.
Thank you, Robin.